I've been in love with my best friend since I first met him. It's not going away, and I don't know how to deal with it. I've been deeply in love with my best friend for 2 years now, and I'm reaching a breaking point. I'm 23, he's 21, and the feelings just won't fade, no matter how much I try to move on. What's worse is that I have no clue how he feels about me. It's like I'm stuck, unable to open myself to the idea of being with someone else because my heart keeps pulling me back to him. We met 2 years ago, and I was smitten right away. At first, I honestly thought we were dating. Those first few hangouts felt like dates to me, until one night when he started talking about a crush he had on another girl. That moment was like a cold bucket of water to the face. I immediately told myself, okay, not dates, just friends. Got it? And I shifted my focus, determined to just be his friend. But it's not that simple, is it? He's not just anyone. He's everything I could ever want in a partner. He ticks every single box on my list. We have this connection that amazes people. Early on, folks couldn't believe we hadn't known each other for years. We share the same sense of humor, love the same games and TV shows, agree on big topics like politics, and even have similar dreams for the future. But it's not boring. Our differences spark fascinating conversations. We discover new music together, help each other with work and writing, and lean on each other emotionally. I call him when I'm upset, and we've both admitted that going a week without seeing each other feels weird. The problem is, I've fallen so hard for him that I don't know how to handle it anymore. I thought my feelings would fade with time, but instead, they've only grown stronger. Every time I see him, it's like falling in love all over again. My friends used to tease me about it, but now they just look at me with pity when his name comes up. My sister keeps telling me I need to cut ties with him for my own good. And the thing is, she might be right. When we don't talk for a few days, I start to think I'm moving on. But the moment I see him, everything comes rushing back. I've tried dating other guys, wonderful guys even, but no matter how great they are, my feelings for my best friend overshadow everything. It's like I can't open my heart to anyone else because he's already taken up all the space. It's frustrating and heartbreaking, and honestly, it's starting to feel pathetic. What really keeps me trapped, though, are the looks he gives me. These moments happen when we're out with a group, at a party, or the pub. I'll glance over at him, and he's already looking at me. These aren't fleeting glances. They're long, intense stares that last 6 or 7 seconds, long enough to feel charged with something unspoken. And then there's this smile he does, a small, soft one that I've never seen him use with anyone else. I thought I was imagining it at first, but my friends have noticed it too. It's driving me insane because I can't figure out what it means. Am I overthinking this? Probably. But there's this tiny, stubborn part of me that wonders if he feels something too. The fear of losing him, if I confess, is paralyzing, though. He's my best friend, the best friend I've ever had, and I can't bear the thought of ruining what we have. But at the same time, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is fine when my heart is breaking every time I'm around him. Do I tell him how I feel, risking our friendship? Do I cut ties and walk away, even though losing him feels unbearable? Or do I just keep waiting, hoping these feelings will somehow disappear on their own? I'm so frustrated and overwhelmed that I've cried over this more times than I can count. I just don't know what to do anymore. Any advice would mean the world to me. Hello, everyone. A little over 5 years ago, I posted on this subreddit asking for advice about an incredibly painful situation. I was deeply in love with my best friend, and the feelings weren't mutual. I had honestly forgotten all about that post until recently when I was resetting a password for an old account. While searching through my emails, I came across the username Tobbs13 and curiosity got the better of me. Reading through that post brought back a flood of memories from what feels like an entirely different life. I remember the responses clearly now, though. They were comforting but also terrifying. The overwhelming consensus was, just ask him out. That advice scared me to death back then. This isn't exactly a happy update, and I'm sorry if that's disappointing. But finding the post and revisiting that chapter of my life felt significant, and I thought I owed some sort of closure to the people who were so kind and thoughtful in their replies. To one particular commenter, whose account is now deleted, I'll forever wish I had a way to reach out. Their words were among the most compassionate and insightful I've ever received. For some context, back then, I truly believed I was in love with my best friend. It wasn't a passing crush. It was the kind of love that consumes you entirely. I'd been carrying these feelings for about 2 years at that point. When he talked about other people he was interested in, it felt like a knife to my chest, yet I'd still encourage him because I wanted him to be happy. Looking back, I realize how much of that bordered on obsession. Unrequited love is its own kind of torture. It's nearly impossible to move on, and the more you try to fight it, the more your brain fixates on the person. For 2 long years, I lived in this state of constant emotional turbulence. I'd feel euphoric just being around him, only to crash into despair when I was reminded, through his words or actions, that he didn't see me the same way. I analyzed everything. How long did he hold eye contact? How quickly did he reply to my texts? Did his hugs linger just a little longer than they should? Every tiny interaction had the power to either make or ruin my entire day. It was exhausting, and I wasn't getting anywhere. Fast forward to about a month and a half after that post. I was still mustering the courage to ask him out when life threw me a curveball. I ended up becoming the head organizer for a major university event. This role came with a controlling, unkind manager, and I was balancing it with writing my thesis. On top of all that, the emotional strain of my feelings for my best friend made everything feel unbearable. The result? Burnout. Severe, all-encompassing burnout. To make matters worse, I started drinking heavily to cope. Eventually, my reliance on alcohol spiraled into addiction. That period of my life was marked by a lot of darkness. At one point, I experienced what I now recognize as a drug-induced paranoid psychosis. It felt like my world was crumbling around me. By September, I moved back in with my dad. For the next year, I did little more than sleep, cry, and escape into video games. Skyrim became my sanctuary while I attended rehab and therapy. Slowly, I began to piece my life back together. By early 2021, I returned to school and started rebuilding myself. Recovery was long and painful, but I made it. I've been sober since 2020, and while I still experience some lingering paranoia, it's manageable now. For instance, I once genuinely believed my landlord was spying on me through a radon detector. Thankfully, I've moved past that phase. Therapy helped me establish a work-life balance, and today, I'm in a much healthier place. As for my best friend, I honestly don't know where he is or what he's up to. I looked back through our old messages recently. In September of that year, he called me a few times, but I didn't answer. He sent a message around Christmas, asking if I wanted to meet up, but I never followed through. His last message to me was on January 4th, 2020, and we haven't spoken since. To be clear, I don't blame him for the loss of our friendship. My non-responsiveness was the nail in the coffin, not just for him, but for all my friendships at that time. Addiction, depression, and paranoia consumed me, and I let everyone slip away. It's one of my biggest regrets. With years of therapy and hindsight, I've realized that I wasn't truly in love with him. I was in love with the idea of him. He represented something unattainable, and that unattainability became an obsession. Looking back, some of my attempts to deepen our relationship were laughably transparent. From trying to convince him that deep friendship was all one needed for love to finding excuses to hold his hand or sit closer, my efforts were obvious in hindsight. But he never reciprocated, and honestly, I think he probably knew and chose to remain kind. Eventually, with distance, my feelings faded. By mid-2020, the overwhelming heartache had subsided, and I felt free for the first time in years. My therapist advised against reconnecting with him, and I followed that advice. Not long after, I met someone new, a man who shares the same connection and compatibility I once thought I'd never find again. The difference? This time, the feelings are mutual. We've been together for almost 3 years now, and we're planning a future together complete with marriage and kids. My life today is quieter, but so much more fulfilling. I have a stable job, help my dad on his farm, and spend my free time crocheting gifts for my niece. My partner and I share a love for video games, museum visits, and debates over takeout. Looking back, I wouldn't want to relive those tumultuous years of my early 20s, but they shaped me into who I am now. For anyone reading this who might be in the same boat, I hope my story shows that things can and do get better. Healing takes time, but it's worth it. Now on to the next story, story 2. Grown man ruining my son's life. Help me ruin his. Hello, and thank you so much for your time and creativity. I am truly grateful for any ideas you can offer. Right now, I feel like I'm living in a nightmare, and I desperately need help. My son just turned 18 and, unfortunately, he's disabled. He relies on multiple medications and requires support at school. On the positive side, he's doing well in some settings, and he is on track to graduate and attend trade school, where he'll also receive support. As his parents, we are incredibly proud of the progress he's made. However, there is a problem that's been eating away at me. He is extremely impressionable, a bit socially awkward, and desperate for friends. For years, we've dealt with him giving away his belongings, finding himself in bad situations, like someone offering to sell him rocks at a park, thinking they were collectible stones when they were actually drugs, and being easily bullied. He has a strong desire to be liked, and it breaks my heart to see him go through this. We've been working hard in therapy and with trusted adults to help him build stronger boundaries. Then, there's the grown man. Let's call him Vincent. Vincent is 28 years old. He's frequently homeless, often living in a tent in parks or staying in motels through vouchers provided by our city. He owns 2 unspayed and unneutered pit bulls, which he leaves either in the tent or motel room while he works at a fast food restaurant. I actually feel some compassion for him and his animals, if he weren't so involved with my son. This all started when Vincent asked my son to watch his dogs while he worked. My son, eager to have a friend and help out, agreed. He loves animals, so spending hours in a park, watching dogs, seemed like a fun way to help. Vincent would ask him to bring dog food, toys, and blankets from our house. My son would do so, even if we told him no. At first, we allowed it, appreciating his desire to help. However, things started taking a darker turn after my son turned 18. Vincent told him he didn't need to stay with us anymore and could live with him. For weeks, my son was sleeping in the park or in Vincent's tent, accompanied by the dogs. Vincent introduced him to alcohol and drugs, beer and weed, and my son eagerly accepted, believing he was helping Vincent while also fitting in. Vincent promised to help him get a tent and vouchers, too. The police have been somewhat sympathetic, especially because of my son's disabilities and medical issues. But he is 18 now, and there is little they can do. His school has been supportive, but once again, he is 18, and we've never pursued any legal guardianship or conservatorship, believing that would be too intrusive, especially since he's been doing well in many areas up until now. In the past week, Vincent moved into another motel room and invited my son to stay with him. My son, feeling a sense of loyalty to Vincent, went along. He spent the day in the room, watching the dogs while Vincent worked. They probably smoked together and hung out when Vincent wasn't working. My son texted us, but he was insistent that, as an adult, he could go wherever he wanted. But in doing so, he missed a week's worth of medication, school, a part-time job, and a crucial appointment. Being Vincent's friends had become more important than these things. He said, "Vincent's like a brother to me. He's the best brother I've ever had. Vincent's family has kicked him out, but they live nearby. I have no idea who takes care of the dogs when my son isn't around. Vincent doesn't drive, and earlier this week my son gave him his bike, saying he needs it more than I do. Yesterday, my son came home, and we had a psychiatric crisis on our hands. He'd been unmedicated for days, probably also high or drunk, and his medical issues were spiraling out of control. He started banging his head on the concrete floor. We had to call emergency services, and when the police arrived, he spat at them, leading to his being restrained and having a spit hood placed on him. It was a terrifying and traumatic experience for all of us. My son was begging for help. We're not sure when he'll be stable enough to come home, and he might even need a medical procedure. Today, he was coherent, apologizing, crying, but still 100% convinced that Vincent is his friend. As difficult as the situation is, I understand that it's natural for my son, at 18, to have his own life and friends, and not to tell us everything. He deserves some independence. He has other friends his age, and their hangouts are much more appropriate. However, these other friends are busy with their own lives and responsibilities. They can't always be there. Vincent, on the other hand, is always available, and my son feels needed and valued when Vincent reaches out. So, the question remains, how can I get Vincent out of my son's life? I don't want to harm anyone or stress the dogs. They're not at fault, and my son would never forgive me if anything happened to them. A few months ago, I posted here asking for help to remove Vincent from my son's life. I'm so grateful for all the suggestions and kind words. As of today, my son is doing well. He's in a transitional living house with 5 other young men and 2 house managers. It's been a game changer for him. He's learning essential life skills like cooking, cleaning, and finding a job. The house even includes therapy, yoga, skateboarding, and daily gym sessions, truly a dream come true for him. The house is about 40 minutes away from where Vincent lives. My son is making new friends, feeling purposeful, and learning how to be independent. Job training is also part of the program, which is a huge win for him. Before this all happened, I took as many of your suggestions as I could. I contacted Vincent's workplace manager and the motel where he stays. I informed them that Vincent was allowing a disabled teenager to stay with him, offering him alcohol and drugs. The manager, who is a local small business owner, took the information seriously. I also went to the motel and pointed out the sign that said all guests must show ID, which my son doesn't have. I made it clear that I hoped they were following the rules, or I'd contact corporate. I also started calling the non-emergency police line when I saw Vincent camping after park closing time, leaving his dogs unattended. The police would move him along. One of the best pieces of advice I received was to be Vincent's best friend and show up wherever he was. So I did. If he wanted to see my son, I was right there, at the park, his work, the motel. I even printed flyers to inform others in the park neighborhood, which has a playground for small children, about the tent, the camping, and the unsupervised pit bulls. Vincent grew increasingly frustrated. He accused me of stalking him and said he'd call the police. I calmly responded, "Please do. I'd love to tell the police what you're doing with my son and other vulnerable young people. If you want to be in my son's life, I'm in yours. The choice is yours." I was feeling bold, empowered by the advice and encouragement I received here. I was ready to take on this challenge for as long as it took. In the meantime, I found a lawyer and began tapping into resources to get my son job training, as he really wanted to feel grown up and contribute. For a few weeks, my son worked at a local drugstore through a program from an agency. It was a huge boost for him, stocking shelves, cleaning, helping customers, and it kept him busy, which helped to distance him from Vincent a bit. Eventually, Vincent either grew tired of dealing with me or realized my son wasn't worth the hassle. The motel he'd been staying at stopped letting him in, and he had to move to a location farther away. The distance made it harder for him to manage, and I think he realized that my son wasn't worth the trouble. So he stopped contacting him. Thanks so much to all of you for your advice and support. I was so focused on trying to fix things for my son that I didn't know how to address Vincent directly. Your suggestions made a world of difference, and today, my son is happy, healthy, busy, and thriving.